I'd like to welcome you to What the Tech podcast. Now, on today's show, we're going to explore how AI is impacting the recruiting and hiring process. Now, yes, there's efficiency in leveraging machine learning to really sort through the data, look through and get patterns and maybe find candidates, but it might be hurting your ability to hire the best and the brightest in the market. Some say it really is. Also, there are rising concerns about how these algorithms are actually creating their own forms of bias or potentially discrimination. Now, this could also potentially lead to ethical concerns. So if AI is truly here to stay, how do we use it responsibly? How do we avoid potentially dehumanizing the hiring process completely? Well, that's what we're here to discuss in today's episode of What the Tech. So I want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Our guest today is the CEO and founder of the Adler Group. Over the past 30 years, he's helped thousands of companies implement win-win hiring programs that find and hire exceptional talent. His book, Hire With Your Head, is a top 10 bestseller on Amazon, and he's been featured in places like Inc. magazine, Business Insider, Bloomberg, and even the Wall Street Journal. He is a renowned hiring and talent management expert, and he's here to share his vast insights on AI and its limitations on finding the best talent available. I'd like to welcome to the show Lou Adler. Lou, it's really great to have you, and this opportunity to discuss this with you is super exciting.
Hey, thank you very much for inviting me, Troy. Look forward to chatting.
Yeah, that should be a fun conversation. I really enjoyed the first one that we had, and I'm really excited to explore this a little bit deeper, with you. But I did want to kick it off with a question, not necessarily on the topic, but just kind of to get familiar with you a little bit. You've been hiring people for over 40 years, and specifically professionally hiring people for at least 30 plus years of that, right? I'm curious, why in the first place did you get started with what you're doing, and why are you still so passionate about it today?
Well, I got started only because I was actually, when I was very young, I was running a manufacturing company and hated the group president. He was my boss. He was a micromanager, and I was 32 years old at the time, and he kept on telling me what to do, and I said, just leave. I don't need you. Either fire me but I quit 4 times in 1 year. I thought I was doing a great job until he showed up, and so we clashed every single time. So I just decided to become a recruiter, which was kind of weird, but more because I was using these recruiters who were doing financially and lifestyle, having a pretty cool life. So my wife and I talked about it, and I became a recruiter. But I realized that recruiting could be a business process. When you're in manufacturing and finance and accounting and business controls and process controls, you recognize that everything has to be a process. When I got into recruiting, I realized it was a bunch of odds and ends here duct taped together. And I said, by making it a business process, which ultimately called performance-based hiring, you actually can get better results. More top performers, both once they're hired, and what we call win-win hiring is the idea of hiring for the anniversary date, where the candidate is still enthused about the job 1 year later, and the hiring manager is still glad he or she hired the person. So the fascination I find from it is nobody's getting it right. It's very hard to implement that, even though conceptually it makes sense. So that's why I'm interested in having this conversation with you, to see even if AI can help.
Yeah, no, I love it. And, you had some interesting perspectives on that, but I also like to ask, another kind of get to know you, if you don't mind. I come up with quirky questions just because I enjoy hearing people, who are obviously professionals in their field, just kind of give a different perspective than just all the corporate, type things that we can hear sometimes. And so I thought of a question for you. And so, Lou, if Steven Spielberg was making a movie about your life, who would you want to play that movie in place of you, of course?
Well, let's say this. I don't know that I'd want this person every stage, but I have to go back 30 or 40 years. I was at this little grocery store, and I saw this woman at the end of the aisle, kind of looked over at me down the aisle and kind of was shocked. Then she went away, and then she went around and got her husband and went down the aisle and pointed down me, and then they kind of, in a weird way, kind of went around the corner. But then I guess they had the guts to come up to me and they said, "Are you Steve Martin?"
I can
And I
see it.
said,
Yeah.
and I said, "Yes, but don't tell anybody." So, I think she really thought it was Steve Martin. So the reality is, people come, "Oh, you look like Steve Martin." So whether that would be the right person to do it, that's the story I'll go with, and that is a true story.
That's
And
fantastic.
I just played along with her. She was so nervous and thought I was Steve Martin, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go with that one. That would be it. How we'd use him as a young person, I don't know, but whatever.
He's kind of fallen out of favor, but I mean, I loved his movies, like his humor and things like that. But yeah, no, that's a good one. And I think he would do a good job, to be honest with you.
Yeah, we'll go with that one. I can't juggle or play the banjo, but we'll go from there.
That's right. That's right. Who can, right? All right. So what kicked this whole thing off for me, Lou, was when I read an article of yours, because I've been a follower for a while, and it really like touched on it. It wasn't really in depth or anything, but you kind of laid out why AI, potentially is doing kind of a poor job of hiring, and for some unique and interesting reason. You actually laid out about 10 things that you needed to hit on, but that article, you stated that the biggest problem for AI for hiring was actually it's assessing competency and not fit, and potentially their motivation. And I'd love for you to elaborate on that maybe a little bit more for me.
Well, let me kind of go back to my original background to give you some credibility. My first job
Absolutely.
was a guidance and control systems engineer. This is when I'm 22, trying to figure out when to blow up a nuclear missile when it was off course. So
Right.
my background is heavy data, heavy analysis. And when you look at AI, the idea is to look at all of these large pieces of data and try to come to conclusions. Okay, I got this data, and here's the reaction to all this data.
Right.
But the reality of it is, if you use data to predict human performance or on the job performance, and you use the data pool, which is candidates who apply to a job, that's the wrong data pool. The best candidates who are top achievers aren't those who applied to the job. The best candidates are generally referred, they know the hiring manager, they get promoted internally. So if you use a database of candidates of, hey, here's the millions and millions of people applied, how many of these got ahead, and what are the best fits? So you can't just look at who got hired from this initial database. You got to look at their post-hire success and performance. And AI doesn't do any of that. They're looking at a pool of data, which I don't think is the correct pool of data to use to derive critical hiring decision making. And they're not using the criteria of on-the-job performance as the criteria to say, okay, what are we pulling from this? So if you look at 10 million people, only 1% of those people are going to apply or get a job. And then there's going to be as far fewer of those are going to get ahead and get promoted and become senior executives within the company. So you got a very narrow data pool, and you got a very narrow decision point, and then mixing and matching those with all the data you want, all the most sophisticated data you know how, ain't going to happen. And that's why I say you look at that and you say, you could say you don't need to be a rocket scientist to do that. And I was 22 years old, so yeah, I worked on rockets, but I can't say I was a rocket scientist. Nonetheless, a good data analyst would just look at the data background and conclude, hey, this is not the right pools of data you're going to use to make very important decisions. So that's where I came to that conclusion.
Yeah, I think for the most part, my experience in hiring people and being hired, the best people usually come to you by way of a referral or, some other avenue that isn't necessarily an online application process. And I think that's why, a lot of times people aren't hired from those at all. So maybe dive in a little bit more about some of the critical like data points that you are looking for. You mentioned the key performance objectives in that article, and I think you just touched on it again. What are some of the things that you are looking for that AI cannot measure, besides the fact that it's the wrong pool?
Okay, so when I became a recruiter, which is over 40 years ago, and initially for 10 or 20 years of being a recruiter, I would actually track the performance of people whom I placed in jobs. I even tracked the performance of people who I didn't place, but they became my clients, or I knew them as friends or associates, or just so after a bunch of and we even tracked the people we placed in jobs who underperformed or got fired in the first year. We were one of the first search firms that gave a 1-year guarantee. So I had a lot of data, and I can't say it was statistical data, but if you look at hundreds and hundreds of pieces of data, you start recognizing what factors predict on-the-job performance best. And eventually, and it took a while, it wasn't instant, I
Right.
came up with what I call the formula for hiring success, which says ability to do the work in relationship to fit drives motivation. And because motivation's so important, we square it, and that equals results. So ability is all the things you'd think: technical
Right.
skills, but soft skills, organizational skills, problem solving skills. Smart. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about ability. But you can be a very capable person and still underperform if the fit isn't right. If you don't like the job, well, you're not going to be very motivated. If you don't like the hiring manager, you're going to get just like me. I was competent to do the work. I just didn't want to do it when he was around. Uh, if you don't like the company culture, I liked making decisions quickly and making decisions. But if you're in a situation where you're forced to go through this bureaucratic series of steps to make a critical decision, you're going to get frustrated. If you don't have the resources to do it right, if people put stumbling blocks in your way, you're not going to perform as well. On the other hand, if you have a great hiring manager who breaks those bottlenecks down, who reinforces your ability, helps you grow and develop, assigns you good projects, you're going to be very successful. So those fit factors are always variable. And they're not taken into account in any of this AI stuff.
Right.
My idea is that, and most job descriptions list skills, experience, and competencies. They don't even get at any of the fit factors. Hey, do you, the candidate, want to do this work? Is the environment right for you? Is the manager right for you? Is the style right for you? This organization, and number 2 and 3, is our company going to provide this on a continuing path over time? Right. So all of those variables are rarely considered when you hire somebody. But I, as a recruiter, giving a 1-year guarantee, I was forced to consider them because I don't want to give the money back or do the work over again after a year. So I became very religious about doing it. And I didn't do it altruistically to help human nature. I did it selfishly. It was my business. I wanted people to be in a good job and be satisfied and grow. And I wanted the hiring manager to use me over and over again to hire people.
Yeah.
So yes, I think there was an altruistic undercurrent to it. But the reality of it was a business decision. What I find interesting is hiring managers don't make that business. It's more important to them, and candidates make short-term decisions based on the size of the pay package, not the work they're going to be doing what drives satisfaction. That's why the formula, kind of easy to say, ability to do the work in relationship to fit drives motivation, and it's squared. Getting all those factors right when you make the hiring decision is a bit of a challenge. So that's why that keeps me motivated, is how do I get people to buy into that concept? Intellectually, everybody buys into it, 100%. Right. Doing it is, I don't have time. I got this. They all come up with problems, or I got biases, and whatever it is, they always have an excuse for not doing it, even though intellectually they know that it's correct.
So, is there a way to measure these the way in such a way that AI could? Like, let's say we, took your brain and your process. Is it possible that AI could do some version of it and kind of narrow the field if you did have the right candidates?
Oh yeah, I think absolutely.
Okay.
So, let's say this. I talk to a lot of people who develop AI for hiring, and I always ask them, let's go back to the individual candidate. When I look at a candidate, and a good recruiter looks at a resume, and a good hiring looks at a resume and quickly says, this is a good person. It's usually the quality of their academic background, the quality of the companies they've worked for, the rate of change of growth in those companies. So you look at those factors, and you go, this is a good person. Troy's a good person. He's been with this company 4 years. He's already been promoted twice. He's got a good academic background, or he's got a solid background, but he's still been promoted twice. So you look at all these factors and you weigh them.
Right.
AI can certainly do that. So I talk to people who develop AI, and the first question I ask them is, how are you measuring rate of change of growth? Because that's a primary criteria for high performance. A good person grows faster. How are you measuring that? They get assigned bigger projects, bigger teams, they get promoted, they get more. And they say, we're not looking at that. Well, I can already tell right away if they're not looking at that, they're not looking at the best people.
Right.
They're looking at the criteria. How do we fill jobs faster? And I think AI probably does a good job of filling jobs faster. Do they fill the jobs with the right people for the long term? No. But that's how I would do it. I think you can look at a resume and say, hey, this is a top performer. They get lots of recognition. And you have to look at where is this person clearly in the top half or top third or top quartile of his or her peer group. And then you got an opening to say, okay, I think this is the top person.
Yeah, no. So what are the indicators or the key components that they are measuring for, since they're not measuring for the right ones that you've seen?
Okay, so now I think when you really look at it, they are probably So here's what I find interesting, and I can't go into the full analysis because I don't know
Okay.
exactly. But when you look at AI in general, most of the, I don't want to even say the users, but I would say even some of the people who use the AI tools take all this data and look at all the factors in a resume or any piece of data, and then say, okay, and have a conclusion. And they don't know when you go through all the algorithms and and I can't even remember the names of them, although I read about them. They try to figure. We're not really sure what's the best predictors. So they kind of, you got 100 variables, and they go through all the machinations of how do you figure out what's this, and here's the conclusion is who got hired based on this data pool. I think they're looking at skills, years of experience, academic background. They're not looking at the types of projects because they can't get that. So you look at a resume, you look at 10 resumes for any spot on LinkedIn. What data do you have? You have a title of a company, you have the academics, you have the education, you have the age, roughly the age, the track record, but you got mostly skills listed there, and maybe project types and titles. So that's what they're using to mix and match and say, okay, let's make a prediction based on this. But generally speaking, it's flawed. So I can't, at that point in time, I'm beyond my pay grade on this. Other than I know that they're not looking at the right stuff, they're looking at other stuff that in my mind doesn't predict performance or diversity, or narrows the pool to a very small group of people. And generally it's the wrong group of people.
Yeah, no, I actually read that there's many concerns about discrimination and bias, that some of these algorithms actually are either learning or innately kind of like function because, maybe certain races or, backgrounds or things like that might have, or even different countries have different kind of processes and ways that they do things that, it can create a bias in there because there isn't necessarily enough data, but it's kind of trying to connect the dots and, kind of forcing it in some ways, if that makes sense.
If you're looking at who gets hired, and that's a biased pool, and you're looking at the people who have applied, and you say, okay, from that pool, what group of these people who applied got hired? Well, if the people who got hired are biased, then obviously the algorithms to figure out who gets hired is already biased too. So you got to say, no, we don't want the people. So I think you're right. It kind of self-reinforcing. It learns what it shouldn't learn.
Right. Yeah, because we're biased. Horribly biased. You mentioned this thing, and honestly, I tried to watch the video, but I couldn't click on it. But it talked about, or you mentioned the Sherlock Holmes kind of deductive interview method as a kind of a part of this process of really identifying the best 10 predictors of hiring success. And I was honestly, I was curious about it. I wanted to hear kind of maybe more about what you meant from that, because the video, I couldn't find it. So
yeah, sure. No, well, I think the issue is that most people would think that I personally am a good interviewer. I've interviewed thousands and thousands of people, and I'm pretty accurate on. So Adler's pretty good, but the truth is, I'm not this PhD psychologist. I'm like a detective. I know that if you're a good accountant and you go to a public accounting firm, all I have to do, and you're 22 years old and you got an accounting degree and you're taking your CPA exam, but you haven't got it yet. And I just say, hey, Troy, what kind of projects have the managers in your accounting firm assigned you? This is after 6 months. Well, I guarantee if they think you're pretty smart, they're giving you tough technical accounting problems to handle or important clients to handle.
Right.
If you're an engineer after 6 months to a year, they're not giving you maintenance or boring. They say your manager thinks you're pretty good, so they're kind of, hey, Troy, what kind of projects you working on now? You've been there at 6 months. What kind of projects you're handling? Who's on the team you're handling with it? Oh, I'm just working with QA. I'm working with these people. No, and I remember talking with one accountant, because I place a lot of people in accounting. She was like 27 years old, and she was getting her MBA, and she was with a big accounting firm, but she was at a big entertainment company at the time, and I know she was only 27. And I can't remember her name. I just said, Kathy, when you first started with, and I think it was PricewaterhouseCoopers, but it might not have been. But irrespective of that, I said, what kind of projects were you on in your first year? And she said, I was working on a big project talking to the CFO of this major corporation. She told me the name of the company. I said, is that a division controller or the company? Oh, she said, it was the company controller. Well, this was a world 100 size company. And here you get a 23-year-old year-old person working one-on-one with the chief financial officer of a huge corporation. No partner at a major public accounting firm would do that unless they thought she was good.
Right.
Last year, we were working with a company hiring 50 software developers. I asked the director of engineering, what do you do with your best people, your best software developers after you've hired them for 3 to 6 months? I give them my toughest projects. I want to stretch them to see how fast they can grow. Everybody does that. So the Sherlock Holmes technique, Troy, is I just look for evidence that somebody else thought you were good. If somebody signed you to a big, important project, obviously they were good. I don't have to figure that out.
Yeah,
somebody else figured it out. So I'm looking for the evidence. Good people get assigned big projects. They get assigned stretch projects. So you just look for that kind of evidence. That's the Sherlock Holmes idea of seeking evidence to determine success rather than as looking for this brilliance. And then I try to look at the circumstances in that hiring formula for success. Why did that happen? What was the set situations that allowed you to be there? Then I said, okay, now I've got some factors. But I've also kind of understand the job because I've done all that same work. Hey, tell me about the job. What's the environment like? What are the challenges a person's going to face? So I put those two pieces together and turns out pretty accurate. You have to do both sides of the mapping. Understand the candidate and why he or she excelled and what the circumstances were. Understand the job to see if those situations are at least reasonably close. Yeah, they probably could, but they're not. See, I think they're thinking about the wrong project. They're looking at, yeah, I say, okay, why don't you look at your best people and figure out what it happens? There's a guy, Dr. Todd Rose, who's written a book called The End of Average. He said, everybody can be great given the right set of circumstances, but everybody's using this short-term thinking of, hey, I got to get the biggest pay, I got to get the job filled faster. So you think about it. If your focus is to fill a job with the best person who applied, who has the skills, but that's not how the best people get promoted or get hired or get in the top 25% of their peer group, you're mixing and matching apples and oranges and trying to predict what kind of soup it's going to be. That's actually probably a pretty good metaphor.
Yeah, no, it's a great metaphor. And honestly, I read that article too, where everybody can be in the top 25%. And I was like, really? Really? And I was curious, like I was hoping you could explore that a little bit more, but I'm interested in this simple fact that like I don't think that at the current state, artificial intelligence, machine learning has the ability to bring the magic that an individual can, and I'm concerned that it's dehumanizing the process as well, because there's a lot of really quality people out there that, as you and I spoke previously, don't meet all the checks, in the boxes because they don't maybe have the experience, but their aptitude and their ability to excel, all of those things are there. They're just coming like right out of their first job out of college, or they're coming right out of college. And, some of those things are harder to measure. And so that's why I feel like it's so important. I think you agree that you have really good people who can do that investigative analysis and ask those more challenging questions. And not only just the first question, because that's what AI typically will do, is it'll give you the first one. Okay, oh, great. What if they say this? What if they say that, right? How do you take it to the second, third, and fourth level to really diagnose if there's real experience there and real talent, right?
Well, let me kind of go back and add a question to you about why someone can be in the top 25%. And it's actually pretty easy. Think about it. Just to be in the top half is real easy. You just got to be reasonably productive, reasonably reliable, a good person, work well with others, and get your job done on time. Be reliable.
Right.
The reason why people are in the bottom half is because somebody made a hiring mistake. They gave you a job you didn't like, or they didn't do all their due diligence, or you focused, oh, I can do that work, I just don't want to do it anymore. Right. And you gave that person too much work. So to be in the top half is actually pretty easy. Now to be in the top half of the top half, you just got to have someone who's works a little bit harder, promotes, will volunteer for more work, wants to learn and grow and develop, and wants to be continually challenged. So when you really think about it, the reason anybody's in the bottom half is because somebody made a hiring mistake. Yeah. So you stop making mistakes, everybody's in the top half. I know that sounds stupid and superficial, but it's true. But the other idea is, if you're in the top half and top quartile, you don't have to look for a job. So it's a high-touch process. I've got to convince you. I just can't, hey, Troy, I got a great job for you. You're interested? No, I'm not interested. But if I was, hey, your former boss called me, Troy, and said that you were great at doing this business intelligence kind of work. Would love to chat with you. I have a real problem. I just love to see if you might be interested in talking about it. Oh, okay, let's talk. So it's it's a slower process. It's a higher touch process. You, the candidate, have to see it as a career move. It's not just, hey, I want another job for more money. The top people in the top half don't make those kind of decisions. They make it slowly. Oh, this could put me on a career path. Mm-hmm. So it's a much more discriminatory, that's not really the right word. It's a much more intensive analysis of, should I change jobs from the candidate's perspective? And is this job appropriate for me to take in the circumstances to take? But hiring managers and companies, no, I got to get you filled the job as fast as possible. So there's just too much short-term thinking. So that's why to be in the top half, all you got to do is stop the mistakes in the short-term thinking. And then to be in the top quartile, you just have to do that matching a little bit better. So that's why I say both of those things go hand in hand. But to be in the top quartile, it's a much more high-touch process. I think maybe AI can get you to eliminate the mistakes, but to really make a great hiring decision on the company's part and the hiring manager's part, or the candidate's part, it takes a little bit more high touch and personalization.
I think that for my experience, like in hiring people, I've always tried to leverage people's strengths, the things that they enjoy doing at the same time. I might be good at something, but I may not enjoy doing it. Like for me, it's, work around the house. I'm very good at it. I grew up, my grandfather taught me how to, do drywall, paint, do all the stuff, carpentry work. And I absolutely dislike it, but I'm good at it, right? And so sometimes people have skills where they just they're not fulfilled by leveraging those skills. And what, in your mind, like what's are some good steps or processes to really identify a best fit for somebody, say an accountant or something like that?
That's a good question. First off, when I take an assignment, I always ask the hiring manager, hey, what does this person need to do to be successful? What is the drivers for the job? Design a new circuit, launch a project in 6 months, build a team of accountants, put a new business intelligence report together, evaluate the code and repurpose it for a new platform. They do stuff. So I know the job itself and the environment in which they're going to do it. As I'm asking candidates, hey, Troy, tell me about some of your biggest accomplishments related to repurposing software. Tell me about some of your major accomplishments focusing on building and managing a team for some complex project. So I'm really digging into your accomplishments related to the job. But part of that understanding the accomplishment, I'm peeling the onion and say, hey, Troy, in that project where you had to launch this new product, where did you go the extra mile? What work did you really like? Where did you take the initiative? Give me some examples. So in every case, I'm always getting examples of where you intrinsically were motivated to do extra work. And I'm starting to see a pattern. In this case, this person goes out of his or her way to support the team, build the team, help the team grow and develop. And some people say, no, they really like to understand the technology, how to get into, how to use this new tool to accomplish some technical task. And you go out of your way. I stayed late. I remember last month I really stayed late trying to figure out how to solve this problem. So I'm really listening to those things of where people go the extra mile and say, that's where I need this person. This is where I don't have to tell the person to do it. He or she will do it on his own. That's the intrinsic motivation. And I know that's critical for the job. If the job is managing a team, but you're a techie and you really like the technical component of it, you're probably not a good fit. On the other hand, if you're a pretty good techie, but really like supporting, coaching, and mentoring others, you're probably the right fit to be a manager. So that's what I'm always listening for, to see the fit. Now, and again, my mind is you have to be happy a year from now, and so does the hiring manager. So you've got to be intrinsically motivated to do that work. I call that the job fit. And that's a critical piece of that hiring formula for success, getting that right.
I think that's powerful. So this job fit formula that you have, like what, besides the fact that they've been there for a year, which is probably a good indicator, what other things are you trying to measure for? Like when you're, because you said that you kind of put this together really out of necessity. It was a business decision, but altruistically, it has worked out really well for your clients as well, and for the candidates, right, in placing them. So like, what are you measuring at that point? Are you doing a check-in, or are they still in the job? Have they gotten a promotion, or what are you looking at?
Well, after a year, I'm usually out of it unless they call me up and tell me. So I don't know. If they're still there after a year and they haven't told me, they're probably okay.
Okay.
Is everybody great? The people, let me just say, in general, when we do spot checks, and they're significant, it's not just 1 out of 10, it's 20, 30%.
Right.
Generally speaking, the person has been assigned work that's very satisfying. They've probably been promoted. They probably handled the bigger project. They probably volunteered for another project that was consistent. So there's patterns of indicate that this person's clearly on the right path and they continue to grow and develop within that company. So those are all positives. But I remember when I first came up with this idea of recognition, this is probably 30 years ago, a candidate was just ready to interview a candidate in my office, and my secretary called and said, Lou, somebody was on the line, and it was a major client that I wanted to have. And I got this, I'm walking back to my office, and I got to take this call. And I said, candidate, I don't remember his name, Bill, it doesn't matter. I said, I'm sorry, I got to take this call. It's very critical. I've been waiting for 2 days to get this call. Would you mind just delaying the call? It's going to be about 20 minutes. I knew it was going to be longer than that, but I said 20 minutes. Right. I said, in the interim, just write down all the recognition you've ever received in your career, any simple pat on the back. So I just had him do that. And I don't know why I did it. It was just to make him, whatever it was, just so he wouldn't be too aggravated with me. When I actually interviewed the candidate, though, it turned out that this idea of just looking at all the recognition he received was very revealing in terms of if this candidate was any good. And I know I wrote an article about it, but the guy had been to a solid school, but not great, but he was in 2 honor societies. He was asked by a VP marketing, he was an engineering manager, but asked by a VP marketing. And one, again, this very quick recognition after 3 months or 6 months on the job, and another department asked him to be on a cross-functional product team. His current job, he was promoted by referral. He got the job through a former boss or former referral. He got promoted twice in 4 years, where most people would have got promoted at best once. He volunteered for some real critical projects that were going downhill, and he got a letter from the president just thanking him for doing that kind of work. So I knew just from that list, I said, this guy's a great guy. And I put him in a job that was not identical, but similar. Because you just knew the guy could learn quickly, he was promoted, good cross-functional skills, and he was a high achiever, and he got recognition from people. So, I mean, the guy was clearly in the top 10% of or 25% of his peer group.
Right.
So those are the things that I look for. And then when I look at a candidate, I start saying, what kind of recognition do you get at that job, Troy? Well, and tell them anything you got, any letters from the president, any signed to different kind of teams. So I'm really recognizing this Sherlock Holmes idea. There's a lot of evidence, if you look for it, of how other people considered you a good person and why. And I'm looking at that evidence, and I use that to counter when a hiring manager tells me I don't like the person, too quiet, too soft, wouldn't fit with our company. And I go, well, the candidate fit with his other company. I remember I had a guy for a big SAP cost project, had implemented a total new cost system. And the CFO thought the guy was too quiet. I said, well, I think you're wrong, because the guy did exactly the same project with a much more complicated company. And because of his soft-spoken nature, he could work with the IT department, the accounting department, the unions, and implement this thing. And he even actually changed how this major software vendor defined a cost project. So to think that this guy's not good enough for it, I think you're misreading the candidate because he was too soft. So that's how you can use evidence of this information, of facts, to overwhelm somebody who's making an emotional decision. And that's important. And I don't think AI even gets close to that, because people make emotional decisions. And if you don't take that into account in the decision-making process, you just have a flawed system of finding decent candidates who probably won't get hired to begin with and won't be fulfilled if they do get hired.
Do you think in general, and not necessarily recruiters like yourself who have so much experience, but in general, that hiring managers make poor decisions because of their emotional connection to people, or that is, kind of that gut feeling? Because there's something to the gut and there's a lot of science behind it. But I'm curious, in your experience, the majority of the time when you're talking with a hiring manager, are you having to convince them to hire the right candidate, or are they're kind of usually in sync, kind of getting in the same feel that you are?
Let's say this. Again, it's the idea that I've changed the rules so that by the time they see my candidates, they're in sync.
Nice. Okay.
But there's a reason for that, is because like this candidate that I just mentioned, there was a real spot with a real CFO with a real company.
Yep.
I changed the way I handled it, is I asked candidates to write up their biggest accomplishments. I know they're related to the job, so I call the hiring manager up and say, hey, would you interview this candidate and review these accomplishments before you do anything else? So they're already written. The accomplishments are already written, so the hiring manager is reviewing them with the candidate. The candidate wrote them, so he or she knows what they are.
Right.
So they're not focused on all these biases due to first impression. So I proactively intervene to prevent that. That's the only reason we're in sync. If I react to that to be in sync, I'm usually successful only 1/3 of the time, because they sometimes don't tell me why they didn't like someone. So I call that the closed door Sherlock Holmes approach. Is I know it's going to happen because I've already told them they're going to review these accomplishments ahead of time. So they focus on stuff they should. Now, can you systematize that? Yeah, probably. But I do it all the time. I've done it hundreds of times. As I just have, hey, Troy, write this biggest team accomplishment up, biggest technical accomplishment up. Make it a half a page. So I make it succinct and it highlights. And now I get a sense of your written skills.
Right.
I then send it to the hiring manager. Hey, I really like Troy for this business intelligence job because of this project and this project. All right. So now, in the first time you're interviewing somebody, hey, Roy, tell us this is pretty cool. Tell us about this project and that project. And then they already know you're kind of performance qualified for the job. And they say, oh, that's pretty cool. So it's really kind of an interesting approach to get somebody in sync. But if I don't do that, I can overcome some, but can't overcome all. So
Well, it sounds to me like just doing a little more of the light lifting up front makes the heavy lifting later on go away for somebody in your role trying to find the right person for the right position for the right company. And I really love the proactive approach, because I've been recruited my entire life. And to be honest with you, I've met some really good ones and I've met some really bad ones. And I think the ones that are really proactive and asking me thoughtful questions about, like, because they understand the role that they're trying to place somebody for, can help me make a decision too. Like, this is probably not a good fit for me. And they usually come to the same conclusion as well. But that's been really powerful in the process of interviewing, because I know what to expect. I know what kind of leader I'm looking at. I know what they want from me, like what the expectation they have. And I don't believe that technology, especially AI, is able to do all of those things. And I don't think they'll ever replace human beings per se. But what I guess functions do you feel like AI could be doing for you and your clients effectively, if not really helping, with that portion?
I can't answer that because I haven't seen it come out, but I do know that I, as a recruiter, if I know the job and the key drivers for the job, I can in 10 to 20 seconds look at a resume and say, this is a potential candidate. There's no reason, there's no reason why that can't be formalized or systematized to say, hey, I can look at this rate of change, there's 5 or 6 factors. So I think there is some role that can start taking candidates, but it wouldn't necessarily be candidates who apply. It would be all candidates. And I think a product like Seekout says, okay, here's a database of millions of candidates. I think some of their algorithms are pretty good. I've kind of worked with them, so I kind of know that it's effective. But now I've identified 20 candidates who are possibles. Getting those now that's only one step. I got to get those candidates to have that personal conversation. So I think it can narrow the pool of people who could be possible semifinalists or possible prospects. But then you got to take another approach is, how do I talk to these people? And you could write articles and write things. So maybe you could also, set up a conversation. Hey, we really like your background. Personalize the letter, personalize the email, and set it up. But hey, I'd really like to talk to you, Troy, because we see this is possible factors. We'd like to set up at least a phone call. So maybe it could do all of that heavy lifting up to the first phone call. Maybe. I haven't seen anybody do that, but maybe. And Seek Out is one that I've seen because I'm working with them on trying to do something like that, where they're getting close to that.
Well, I love that, because my next question in my mind was that, I work exclusively with technology companies in that industry. And I was going to ask what recommendations you would specifically have on them doing it. It sounds like you're working on a project right now to kind of lay those things out. So maybe, fast forward a few months or something like that. I'd love to hear if that's come full circle or a full year. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I would go a full year. We're going to do a course where we talk about, they do a pretty good job in identifying potential candidates using, we call them super skills and rate of change of growth. We've kind of figured it's not perfect because you don't have that much data. But if you get all the people on LinkedIn, all the people on all these databases, just about everybody's got a profile somewhere. So how do you take these people who aren't looking? And that's really the key is if you got people who've applied is different than people who aren't looking. So you say, how do you take that and how do you nurture that funnel through the process? And in some way it's related to sales. In sales, a good sales rep doesn't call every possible customer. They pre-qualify. Right. Hey, I want to pre-qualify the person. How do I do this? We call them semifinalists. In my mind, a semifinalist for a job is someone who can do the work, and that's not an easy decision to make, but can do the work, is clearly in the top half or top third or top quartile of their peer group. We call it the achiever pattern. So I know if they meet those two criteria, the hiring manager at least talk to the person. But would the candidate talk to me? And they have to see the job as a career move. So now I've got two critical people connecting them to make the decision. That's a semifinalist. AI is not there yet to make that decision. But I think Seek Out is getting kind of close, and we're working with them to say, hey, can we kind of pull this off, do this mixing and matching, and before we make into the personal touch. But the idea is let's spend more time with fewer people. Let's pre-qualify those fewer people. And the candidate has to see the job as a career move. The hiring manager has to see the job, the candidate as a potential finalist. So that's what we're trying to do. Haven't gotten there yet, but we're trying to pull it off.
I love it. Yeah. So excited to maybe hear in a year or so how much progress you've made on that. So the last wrap-up question I always have for my guests, and I think you'll enjoy this one, but as I mentioned, I work primarily with tech companies, and tech is kind of in an interesting position. A lot of them were over leveraged. We've lost about 50,000 jobs nationwide with the potential for this economic downturn. A lot of private equity money and things like that have been just pulled back. And I'm curious if they're trying to hire quality talent right now, really high quality talent. What are 3 things that you would suggest that they do right now, and one thing that you suggest they stop doing? Because we all do things that we should stop doing when it comes to hiring quality people.
Well, number one is, I now go back to my first search assignment. Hiring manager asked me, hey, Lou, I need some, and this was 44 years ago, 1978. Plant manager making automotive accessories. Hands me a list, hey, Lou, and I knew the president because we'd worked together when I was working in the auto industry. He had a list of 10 years experience, had to have an engineering background, had to have manufacturing process, and this, and all that's typical stuff. And I looked at him, I said, Mike, that's not a job description, that's a person description. Let's put the job description in the parking lot. What do you want the person to do? He said, I want him to turn around the factory. So we walked through the factory, came up with 6 or 7 things. I've never used a job description listing skills, experience, and competencies. So the first thing you got to do is stop using job descriptions that define a person and define the job itself as a series of performance objectives. So that's the thing you should stop doing and start doing. The second thing you should start doing is asking the candidates and companies alike, don't let people make short-term decisions or long-term decisions using short-term data. What you get in the start date's not important as the work you're doing. And this is for candidates and companies alike. So when I make a decision or when I made an offer to a candidate, before I actually finalized the offer, I said to this, hey, Troy, forget the money. Do you really want this job? Why do you want the job? And the candidate always say, of course I want it. I said, why? And I want them to talk about the non-monetary factors. Impact. I think the job has more impact than one I have. I think it's going to have more job satisfaction. It's work that I intrinsically want to do. It's an environment I want to do it. And I can see the continuing opportunity to do that over multiple years. If I don't hear those words, I'm not going to make the candidate the offer, and if they do make the offer, it's going to be problematic if the person will be successful. So that's probably half a dozen things. Don't let people make long-term decisions using short-term data, but start by focusing on the work itself and convince candidates it's the non-monetary factors that will drive his or her success and performance. You do those things, you will hire better people. Easy to say. It takes some work to do, but it's worth doing that work.
Yeah, it's worth the reps to getting it right because, one person, let's be honest, one person in your company, one really quality person can make all the difference. And if you find, countless numbers by putting in the reps, like as you put it, Lou, it's unbelievable the results you could potentially achieve. And I'm sure that you've helped your clients do that over the years.
Yep.
So, well, hey, I really want to thank you for coming on the show with me and kind of sharing some of your thoughts and ideas, not only just about AI, but like the right way to hire quality talent and some perspectives I hadn't heard before. And I really appreciate it. I do always want to ask, where can people find you if they'd like to hire you, chat with you, follow you, or just annoy you? You probably don't want the last one, but...
Yeah, well, I would say either way, you can certainly find me at hirewithyourhead.com. That's we have one of my books, and we have a book club, so you can certainly be part of that. That has a lot of good contact information. So you go to hirewithyourhead.com is probably the best way to do it. You could look up Lou Adler and hiring, and you'll see all the other links. So I've been pretty outspoken over the years and pretty easy to find. So that's what I would suggest. Go to hirewithyourhead.com, and you'll see all the connections we have.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed having you on the show. I hope whoever's listening right now, make sure you hit that subscribe button and boop the like button. And again, I appreciate all the expertise and the wisdom you bestowed upon us.
Thanks a lot, Troy. Thanks for inviting me. Hopefully this was helpful.
Yeah, it was, for sure.